it's a particularly interesting time right now, as I feel like there is a great deal of attention on issues of segregation, of prisons, of immigration, that, when I think back on when I started working in prisons 20 years ago, I feel like there was almost no discussion of prisons, and now I feel like it's, we had a president who went to a prison not to talk about how tough he was on crime, but to talk about what we do about public safety and about mass incarceration. And one of the ways in which I try to bring some of this research to the policy level in a really accessible way is through a website called The Dream Revisited that I'm working on with Ingrid Gould-Ellen. And the idea behind that website was that there are a lot of unanswered questions about segregation. It seems it's a problem that's been with us for over a century, but there are still questions that are unanswered about what are the causes of continuing segregation, what are the consequences of segregation, and what are some policy responses that can actually affect it. And so the idea with that discussion was to very intentionally bring together scholars, federal and state policymakers, community developers, community organizers, activists together in the same online forum to debate some of these ideas, to bring in research, to bring in experience on the ground, to bring in policy details, and try and relate all of these things together and do that in an accessible format. Do it online, do it in relatively short summaries that can reach a broader public. And Ingrid and I are working on a book now coming out of that, which we think will be a very helpful starting point for students who are interested in some of these urban issues and housing policy issues. So the starting point for a lot of my classes is justice. I'm very passionate about trying to think about how do we think about justice, how do we understand justice, how do we analyze policies in relation to our ideals of justice. And so in the first couple weeks of the Introduction to Housing and Community Development class that I teach, we engage with various philosophies of justice and how they have been applied to the city. And I do the same thing in my environmental justice class, using slightly different philosophies of our relationship, the relationship between justice and the environment. And I think starting the courses with that is also, in a sense, how I start my research, thinking about how do we conceptualize justice and analyze policies in relation to that. In the courses that I teach, I don't try and prescribe one method of understanding justice or one philosophical approach to justice. And I think sometimes that's challenging for students because I think a lot of times they're used to being presented with a whole bunch of articles that make the same point to tell them a certain thing. But I think it's much more interesting to have readings that disagree with each other and allow students to engage with them together. But I try and present a number of philosophies about justice. In the beginning of the Intro to Housing and Community Development class, we look some at the kind of liberal political philosophy approach, exemplified by John Rawls and his theory of justice. We engage with some of the critiques and some of the efforts to build upon that by Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum, and more of a capabilities approach to justice and what that might add. We also look at a stronger emphasis on political economy, coming to some extent out of Marx, and what that says, that analysis of political economy and class structure might say about justice. We also look at, particularly in the American context, the issue of race and white supremacy and justice. And so some starting off points for that could be Ta-Nehisi Coates' article on reparations, which I think very clearly outlines the role of urban planning and perpetuating racial inequality in the United States, and then asking what we do as a response. We also look at feminism, some of the analysis of the material feminist movement as it related to cities and housing, and what that can tell us about how we approach justice in the context of the city and the built environment. So try and provide a number of perspectives to students to draw from, and they do continue to draw from those as the semester goes along.